as a short introduction, I just want to mention the fact that I arrived in the UAE towards the end of 2005, and it was kind of extraordinarily. It was a very kind of powerful experience, and for many reasons, but one very important reason was the sense that I felt that I had landed in a part of the world, and by that part I mean an Eastern world, a Southern global world, where the project of the future had migrated to. And the tense of time that was being inhabited then mostly seemed to be the future. Every billboard seemed to point not to what was happening in 5 minutes' time or 10 minutes' time, but what would be happening in a year's time, 2 years' time, 10 years' time. There was this constant, I've never really felt that anywhere else. It was a very interesting counterpart to one's experience growing up here in Europe, and even in America, where by the end of the 20th century, there's a big question about what did it mean to have a project of the future anymore. Certainly after the collapse of the Soviet Empire and that kind of grand narrative during the Cold War, where the future was being fought in a kind of bipolar way. And we all know that, certain theorists like Fukuyama had decided in the mid-90s that, well, that war was now won. The future was going to look like neoliberal free marketism, and this was like a terminal stage of in a sense, of history. So as just a few months ago, the UAE cabinet announced the world's first minister for artificial intelligence, Omar Al-Olama, who was mistaken for Will.i.am when Becky Anderson interviewed them both at Davos in January. It just goes to show that the future is confusing in many ways. No one is more qualified to tell us what the future promises in the UAE than Noah Raford, who looks nothing like Will.i.am, I think. Noah is the Chief Operating Officer and Futurist-in-Chief of the Dubai Future Foundation. He was also former advisor on futures, foresight, and innovation for the UAE Prime Minister's Office. He's currently leading the construction and curation of the Museum of the Future, which opens late next year. Will you please join me in welcoming Dr. Noah Raford? Thank you.
Thank you, Shuman. Thanks. I like to pace, so I'm just going to give ourselves a little bit of room here. Can you hear me? Is the mic working? Yeah? Great. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, guys. Thank you so much. It's so inspiring to share a room with Your Excellency Zaki Nusebi and Your Excellency Noura Khabi and if I may, Your Excellency Hans Ulrich. And so I would say there's probably about 50% of my oldest and best friends, not just in Dubai, but in the world in this room. So it's great to be here. As mentioned, my name is Noah. I have the pleasure of working with this quite interesting organization, the Dubai Future Foundation. And I love these stories of your time with His Highness Sheikh Zayed, sitting with these advisors, starting to ultimately imagine what the future of the country was going to become, because that's ultimately the exercise that the entire nation is still engaged in, but the future is still to be built. I tell some of my younger friends, remember when your father or your grandfather was building Etisalat, the phone company, or the ports, or the airlines. Well, that's built. We have the benefit of that now, but there's still that plus so much more to be built. And there's a famous interview from His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid, I think it was early 2000s or so, the famous CNN interview where he just finished the IFC, one of the first financial free zones, and the man who was interviewing him says, what percentage of your dream are you complete? Thought about it a little bit, and he said, about 10%. Oh, wow, there's still so much more to be built. Several years later, the same interviewer interviewed him again and said, Your Highness, it's been 5 or 6 years later. How much of your dream is complete now? And he said, about 6%. I said, well, but you've built so much since then. How is that possible? He says, well, our dreams have grown bigger. And that's ultimately the thread, I think, which is so uniquely and well-curated, tying together the vision of the country's founders, the people creating the culture and the technologies and industries of today, and the work that we get to do in the Dubai Future Foundation. I just came from Berlin, where, like that photo of His Highness with the architects, in fact, we showed that photo at the beginning of our workshop in Berlin, where we're running this annual event called the Futurological Congress, and it's been something that has been building up over the last 5 or 6 years related to this work about the Museum of the Future. And as we are now quite close to the opening of the museum, the scale is increasing and the pace is increasing, and we had 100 of the world's most, in my opinion, interesting and talented designers and technologists and entrepreneurs from around the world, from the Gulf, from India, from China, from Latin America, from a few from Europe, and had the chance to start to imagine what the future will look like. And ultimately, this is an ongoing project. There's no such thing as the future. It is something that is constantly being told to ourselves. So just a brief bit of background on the Dubai Future Foundation. So we are a wholly owned government foundation, and we sit in sort of a unique position because our board is comprised of many of the federal ministries, everything from the Prime Minister's office to ministries of healthcare and education, and then the local Dubai government entities, so Dubai municipality, the power, the water, the police, the transportation authorities, as well as many of the Dubai-level state-owned entities like Emirates Airlines and Maras and Dubai Holding, all of whom have quite extraordinary innovation and strategy functions internal to their disciplines. But the foundation was created to start to look at how the emerging trends of tomorrow are cutting across these disciplines and cutting across the normal time frames that we look at. So we tend to look at things which are over the horizon and in your peripheral view, which you might not normally catch. And our job is to, very simply put, as in our tagline, see the future, create the future. And I'll also explain a little bit about what that looks like and how that works. But I'd like to show this little video. Of course, this is not a real time lapse, but I think it gives a spirit of the pace of transformation which has occurred, certainly in Dubai, the Sheikh Zayed Road and Emirates Towers, the old trade center here. Whilst the country itself is 46 years old, and when the country was founded, there were less than 45 college graduates, and as Your Excellency mentioned, now it is one of the centers of global learning, of global culture. Most of the, I would say, infrastructural development accelerated in the last 20 years. Where we really start to see the UAE emerging as a truly global scale crossroads. Everything from the movement of physical goods with DP World and sister companies operating 70 ports internationally to Emirates and Etihad, and even, I mean, like things like the Dubai Mall itself. I mean, 2.5 times more people visit the Dubai Mall every year than the city of New York. So it's this massive hub of flow coming in and out for information and capital and people and ideas and goods. And so our question really, though, is all the forces that are driving this extraordinary transformation in the last 20 years are only accelerating and complexifying and interacting. And we face this question of, well, what do we do next? The same question that His Highness faced at the beginning of the country's history. But we're now facing questions for which there are no answers. There are no analogs. We can't go to the UK to try to learn what a good education system looks like. We can't go to the US to try to understand what a good healthcare system looks like. Because the questions that we have to grapple with, not just as a nation, the UAE, but as the world, are fundamentally those for which there are no good answers. There might not be any answers. And there certainly are no best practices that you can just go and look and sort of do a study trip and come back and bring the person to your country to try to help you come up with a strategy for the ethics of artificial intelligence governing your most sensitive medical data, or how we govern, express, or allow biotechnology, or automation in the labor force. These are things which have to be ultimately designed, explored and designed. So that's why it's interesting to ask this question, what the next 20 years looks like, because the future itself is it's many things, right? It's a story that we tell ourselves today about who we want to be tomorrow. So in this sense, it's an aspirational vision. In some respects, it's the result of external forces, so long-run trends, things like the economy, things like globalization, things like population movement, things like the part of the world that you're in. And also, it's an opportunity for action. That story and those trends come together to try to help influence what can we do now. And in the UAE, all three of those things have tangible realities. So when we talk about the future, as Shuman mentioned, in the UAE and in many cases that in the entire part of the world, it's about now. Like, the conversation about the future is the conversation about today, because it's about who are we becoming, what do we want to do, where are the opportunities, where are the risks. And so when a country like the UAE announces, for example, it hasn't even reached its 50th anniversary, and yet we're already planning for its 100-year anniversary. And it puts these bold goals in place for the year 2071 about having a city on Mars, about having the most progressive governance policies and ecological policies and cultural policies, in the same way that people looked to the Gulf in the 60s and 70s and thought, well, that's impossible. I mean, these guys don't even have electricity, right, or a road system. So too, you could look at these sorts of visions with a sense of incredulity, but I guess I guarantee you, and you probably get a sense for this from our colleagues here, that this is very much backed up with a sense of vigor and enthusiasm and commitment to make these things real, because we are facing a moment where we're going through fundamental transformations. Many of these transformations offer extraordinary opportunities for every aspect of our lives. So, 3D printed organs and genetic analysis of who we are and who our families are, and providing personalized medicine, the chance to actually cure many of the diseases that affect the people that we love and care about. I mean, education itself is undergoing extraordinary revolutions which promise the possibility to provide the world's best education for anyone in the world, no matter where you are, both through technological and non-technological means. You can imagine having personalized guidance from the best professor in the world, or the best artist in the world, or the best advisor in the world, delivered through a combination of AI and personalized learning over the web. And in some respects, too, in a very sort of sectoral way, we're facing these challenges and opportunities around what does it mean to be a human being in the 21st century? Who are we? Particularly vis-a-vis work and the way that automation plays into work, because we're facing a very real potential of a world without work for most people. And as you decouple human value from labor value, then the questions that then provokes and the opportunities that provoke are going to be definitional for the next decade or two. So we have the opportunity to reimagine who we are in relation to work, and who we are in relation to social services, and the role that government plays and private sector plays in that, and I think ultimately who we are as people and what's important in the world. But there's challenges, right? I mean, you probably have seen this figure, 400 parts per million CO2 in the atmosphere. That's the figure that most climate scientists agreed that if we crossed that threshold, we would face irreversible, potentially catastrophic climate change. Well, we crossed that in 2017. So even if we stopped emitting all CO2 today, we're still locked into irreversible, potentially catastrophic climate change unless we start to get into large-scale, totally unknown geoengineering exercises that would actually begin to remove the CO2 from the atmosphere. So the reality of the next decade or two is that we've lost the fight against climate change. Our entire lives will be spent dealing with with its impacts. And that can be done in very entrepreneurial, proactive ways, or in ways which sort of try to ignore this fact. But everything from water to food to social instability is all linked up. Diseases all linked up in the way that our life support systems are fundamentally changing in the next 20 years. I mentioned automation. So the pace and progress of machine learning and artificial intelligence is progressing at, it sounds cliche, but literally an exponential rate. The ability for machines to learn and learn how to learn is advancing in almost every sector. So it's not, I think, inaccurate to argue that we live primarily in an information economy today, and most parts of our lives, even the physical bits about getting us around from the grocery store to our office, et cetera, are digitized already. And the pace of digitization, and therefore the pace of automation, is going to increase at such an extraordinary level that it's not that insane to imagine that our colleagues would be robots, our pets or our houses themselves might become robots. And this links to, I would say, the last and potentially the most important and profound challenge for the next 20 years, which is this growing sense of frustration, of anger, of unease from those who felt like they haven't gained the benefits of 20th century globalization, and those who have accrued perhaps more than their fair share. And so dealing with this sense of social frustration, of populism, as was mentioned earlier, how do we address the fact that many of these people genuinely feel like they haven't gotten what they deserve in the 20th century, and their chances of getting in the 21st century are getting less and less, and therefore seek alternative modes of expression, that anger and frustration in the form of violent extremism. So we have a thesis, and the thesis is that the future has a shape, and the shape looks like this. It's the 20th century breaking at an exponential rate. So all the governance models, business models, mental models, the things that we have been taught to work and the things that we know and learn to expect are going to be challenged at an exponential rate thanks to these opportunities, but also these challenges which I've just sketched for you. At the same time, in a very exciting way, the 21st century is being born at an exponential rate. Everything that I've shown you and all the promise and potential of distributed education, the best healthcare for free or for practically commodity prices. All of these things, the basics of which are being tested, developed, or deployed right now in labs and universities and startup environments right now. But they're nowhere near ready for prime time yet. There's no way, we're not ready to run the economy on Bitcoin yet, as you could probably, if those of you who got excited and lost a lot of money in the last year and a half would probably attest to, right? So what that means is that our entire personal and professional lives will be spent dealing with these transition decades, and that's why I think the UAE is such a vital place to be exploring these global issues, because the UAE is a place that has been under constant exponential transition and has had to deal with these issues of heritage and modernity and post-modernity and changing gender relationships and family relationships and economic relationships and geopolitical relationships in a way, and has demonstrated a facility and a success which is pretty rare, if not unique, in the history of the modern world. So the question for us is, how do we navigate this transition? If indeed the future is going to be one of contestation, debate, experimentation, and opportunity, which has both enthralling and terrifying implications, then how do we get from the best of today to the best of tomorrow? You mentioned this word hope, right? When people are faced with this degree of change, this pace of change, there's a very human and very natural response, and that is to either respond with a sense of enthusiasm, hope, and agency. You can see yourself in that future, and it's a future that you want to work towards, or fear, right? This is a future which you don't understand, you don't see yourself in, and ultimately you want to have nothing to do with. And these are the emotions, sort of the geopolitics of emotions, which are behind most of the recent rise in populism that we see, perhaps even arguably in the context of the last decade of political change within the region. If you are afraid of the future, then you're going to try to resist the future. And if you're going to try to resist the future, then people who argue or offer a means of resistance to the future, traditionally in the means of violent extremism, right, are going to feel very appealing. And you're going to feel like, wow, that's actually someone that hears my concerns. So our job fundamentally, when we're building conversations about the future, is around building legitimate evidence-based conversations around hope, where people can see their role in the future and get a sense for not just how the world is changing in a sort of abstract sense, or in a everything's going to be great, guys, advertising sense, but actually, wow, that's my industry. That guy, that the UAE understands the pain points which I'm experiencing today, and has some roadmap for how this might work. So I just want to share very briefly how we do this. The foundation itself is only 3 years old, but this has been work which has been under development for the last 8 years, really. Our flagship approach to this is actually it's a design and a culture project. And it seems sort of strange to think that you would imagine, if you're fundamentally talking about nation building and transformation in the face of these 21st century challenges, normally one would approach a management consultancy to hire, get a big PowerPoint deck for lots of dirhams, but instead we've decided to take a designerly approach, an approach which leads with the senses of smell, of touch, of feel, of immersion that only arts and culture and design can provide. Whilst I'm giving you a PowerPoint presentation now, this is the thinnest representation possible to this kind of experience you have when you walk into a room and you get a sense for what is the future of education or what is the future of healthcare. Now, I will apologize because in terms of the aesthetics of the future, these are awful. This was the original video which we used to sell the project 4 years ago, and as many things in Dubai and the UAE, we had like 4 days to finish this thing. So we're just like, render it. So whilst architecturally this is what it will look like, aesthetically this has nothing to do with it, because the conversation about the future, as Bethana mentioned, is ultimately one which is grounded in the place where you're having it, right? And I guarantee you that we are working with some extraordinary people, and the aesthetics of the experience which happen in here are going to be aesthetics which are firmly grounded in contemporary Khaliji futures, right? But because contemporary Khaliji experience is intimately linked to the Indian subcontinent and to North Africa and to the rest of the region at large, it will become a place where these issues of the future are reflected through a lens and through an aesthetic of the region. And that's, I think, probably going to be one of the most exciting outcomes of this. But the building is going up at an absolutely terrifying rate. Opens the end of 2019. Our goal is for National Day, 2019, December 2nd. And it's going to be a facility which houses these sorts of immersive experiences of the future. I'll give you an example, but also all of the peripheral infrastructure around that, around how to get involved, classrooms around people that are interested in learning more about robotics or synthetic biology, or new family structures or new youth identity, and this attempt to build the community around this conversation. So we're using art and design, if you will, in a somewhat weaponized sense, right? This is an exploratory approach using the tools that work best of persuasion, media, filmmaking, exhibition design, to engage people in the questions that are the most important, and then use that engagement to create a conversation around this. So every single one of these things, we've done 5 of these in the past 5 years as temporary exhibits. Every single one of these things takes place in some sort of in-world sense. If you might be familiar with the phrases speculative design from Dun and Raby, or design fiction from Bruce Sterling, or experiential futures, Stuart Candy and Jake Dunnigan. This is an approach that it's sort of like Punch Drunk. For you guys based in London, if you've seen the Punch Drunk cinema experience, it's like immersive, in-world experience where you're not just standing in front of a box or a wall with a painting on it. You're stepping into a fully crafted environment that is expressive not just of the main point. So in this case, we were trying to understand if we've lost the battle against climate change, how can we reframe the conversation around climate change to imagine it as the greatest scientific, economic, and cultural opportunity of our lifetimes, and recraft our entire social and economic systems around the abilities and the necessity to deal with it. So we said, okay, water security. Water's a big deal. In the UAE, we desalinated about 90% of our water. So how can we work with and learn from nature to address our water challenges? Well, there's a lot of jellyfish in the Gulf. Jellyfish are nature's most absorptive natural material. There's also mangroves in the Gulf, and mangroves are natural desalinators. So we could imagine crossbreeding jellyfish with mangrove genes and then growing them to be a mile wide, and suddenly you have what we're speculating to be a giant living freshwater factory, a mile-wide jellyfish that you grow off the coast of Dubai or Abu Dhabi that sucks fresh water out of the ocean, cleans it, and then pumps it back to shore through this extraordinary throat-like pipeline. And I could describe this to you, and I'm showing this to you on a video, but when we did this as an exhibition, you literally walked into the observation platform that, as many ministers do, you go on sort of visits to other countries, and your contemporaries bring you to show you their latest projects. So this is the world of 2050, where the infrastructure minister is showing you, the visitor, check out our new project. This is how we handled water scarcity. And the platform itself is this immersive 360-degree screen, and then you drop down in this little submarine journey. And this, as the ministers will attest to, is genuinely more interesting, exciting, and I hope more information-rich than getting a technical policy report on the future of water security, because you have 350 of those a day to deal with, at least. So we use these kinds of approaches to try to not just engage senior leadership, but also people involved in that sector or that part of the social conversation around, say, for example, the future of healthcare here. How would you reimagine the healthcare system? Now, this looks like a technology project. You come into your bathroom and it's scanning you and giving you an update and a holistic diagnosis of who you are. But ultimately, this is an imagined institution. Ultimately, we're using these sorts of technology-driven experiments and immersive experiences to imagine the institutional innovations required to help us get through this transition decade or two. We're imagining new social relationships. We're imagining new forms for the government. And oftentimes, one of my most enjoyable parts of these projects is imagining new ministries, which will come out of this in the long run, because you can really have some fun. But it's a great way to engage people. So even though this is a fake exhibit where we're saying this thing isn't really scanning you, because it is tactile, because it is visceral, people respond to it. And so people were asking us, is this, wait a second, who's scanning my data? I don't feel so comfortable with this project. Like, exactly, these are exactly the questions which we have to explore in order to have an educated conversation about what it means to be a 21st century civilization. How do we handle data privacy and data management? So this creates lots of engagement, but more importantly, it actually creates demand. So this was an unexpected outcome of this approach when we started about 6 years ago. This is a early childhood classroom sand table. This was the first time that we demonstrated this. There's a version exactly like this in the Victoria and Albert Museum right now, right? It was prototyped and developed here in Dubai first, 5 years ago. And when we showed His Highness and the former Minister of Education this beautiful object where you'd pile sand up on top of it and digital snow would form at the top of the mountain, you waved your hands and digital water would fall down into the valleys. And you got to play with it with your friends and peers and thereby learn about the systems of geology and hydrology and geography. His Highness got it. He said, this is great. I'll take 300. Saying, you're Your Highness, I'm really sorry, this isn't real. Like, this is just a demonstration. And he looked at me like I was, a little slow, and was like, you built one, let's build 300 more, right? And that's the moment that we realize this approach to dreaming collectively about a better future, instantiated in objects and experiences through culture and design, was tremendously powerful because people wanted what they saw. So the rest of our work in the foundation, the Museum of the Future is only one of 37 projects which we have going on right now, which is why I have all this gray hair, is once you generate this demand, it's about fulfilling that demand, right? It's about doing something about it. And this is one of the characteristics about the Gulf, which is so profound because you think, okay, that's possible. Great, let's do it. You did one, let's do 1,000 of them, right? The speed of change is so provocative and so exciting. So you can take, for example, this, which is an animation of our 3D printed office. It's the world's first and only 3D printed building. All right, we have about 12 staff in it right now. You can see it was printed in China and then assembled on site in Dubai, printed in about 17 days, assembled on site in 2 days. And this is now old. This is like 2 years old. There are other 3D printed buildings, but they're shells, right? No one's actually living in them. And when you live in them, you have to ask the questions around, okay, how does the air conditioning system interface with the IT system in this 3D printed cement? And is this even legal? So, for example, this building, you might recognize, is in front of Emirates Towers, for those of you who know Dubai. So this is like the most valuable piece of land in all of Dubai because it's in between the Prime Minister's office, many of the ministers' offices, many of the highest ranking corporations, and the financial center. So when we were given this plot of land to test this out, we went to the municipality and said, okay, can we get a building permit for this? And they said, no. Well, why? But this is, we have the letter from His Highness saying we have the authority to try and do this experiment. And they said, well, we don't have any building codes for this. We don't even know what this thing is, right? So by doing these actions, by testing these things out as prototypes, you learn the answers needed to make more informed policy decisions around them. So in fact, after we built and opened the first building, His Highness said, you built one, where's the next 10,000? So we worked with the municipality to develop a 3D printing strategy for the built environment. So as of today, the goal is to have 25% of every single building 3D printed or robotically assembled by 2030, starting at the end of 2019. So you won't be able to get a building permit unless 2% of your building is 3D printed or robotically assembled, and that target will increase every year by 2%, 2, 4, 6, 8, 12, until we reach this. Why? Because about a third of Dubai's real economy is based on construction, architecture, and real estate, and like everything, it's getting totally disrupted by digitization. Do we want to wait until someone else figures out the supply chain and the expertise and the skills and the industry necessary to capitalize on that, or do we want to lead that transformation ourselves and thereby become the global center of this? So these sorts of systems are designed to envision that, prototype it, and then scale it up. We did the same thing with blockchain. You may have heard 100% of all of Dubai government's transactions are meant to be on a blockchain by the end of 2020. We're about 65, 70% of the way there now, led by our colleagues at the Smart Dubai office. And once you have these things, then you have to sort of scale them. So then it's government's job to step away. So we have a variety of platforms for creating markets and communities around these bold initiatives and these bold prototypes, which I won't get into. But I just want to share 3 lessons that I think, and these are as much personal reflections as they are anything official, but the process of undergoing continuous nation building with these bold ambitions in areas for which there are no analogs is both tremendously exciting, but also quite a heavy responsibility. And I would say that the 3 things that we've learned out of this is that the power of vision is fundamental. This is one of my favorite quotes: "Dream no small dreams, for they have not the power to stir men and women's souls." I've learned repeatedly again and again and again, if I take a boring proposition to my boss, not only will I not get that approved, but it'll take me a lot longer to get the next meeting and the next meeting and the next meeting. So there's a cultivation of, I would say, ambition in the best sense of the term around what the future looks like in the UAE, which is quite an exciting place to be, because there are now companies in Dubai, for example, just take 3D printing, that literally moved to the UAE because of this, this vision, whereas most people else in the world are trying to struggle with, wait, is blockchain legal or not? Like, I don't understand it. And now there's like 75 blockchain companies operating in Dubai alone. There's a sense of courage that comes from that, and having the visionary leadership and the supportive leadership is essential, because most of the things that have to be experimented with are in what I like to call pre-legal spaces, the 3D printed building being one. I mean, technically it was illegal, but I just like to say it's not legal yet. Right? And if we are to have progressive 21st century legislation around the things that are the most important to us, from education to healthcare to IP rights to transportation to security to visas and all these things, we have to have a zone of experimentation by which we can design these things. These are designed institutions. And so having the courage and the space to fund these pre-legal activities, and certainly pre-market, because no one in their right mind is going to invest in something which is technically illegal, well, unless you're a criminal, is essential to helping transition through that. So again, in the past, there were no rules. We were making the rules up as we went along, and that's why I think the synergy between the early days of nation building in the UAE and the contemporary days of nation building in the UAE it's the same golden thread. It's just the questions being asked are different. And the UAE leadership has always had just a profound focus on people. One of the areas which we get most critiqued around is, well, you're just doing a technology museum, or you're just doing technology projects. But I think that's the farthest from the truth. I mean, ultimately, it's about how can we use the best tools at our disposal to provide the best opportunities for people to express their loves, their passions, their dreams, their desires, and their aspirations. And so whilst a giant synthetically engineered jellyfish desalination plant might look a little bit, well, alien, ultimately that's about how can we use the tools of biology and science and design to create systems that help us all live the lives that we want to live. So I'll just end on this quote, because I think that the stakes are quite high. As my boss and mentor, His Excellency Mohammed Gurgawi, likes to say, we live in a tough neighborhood in the Gulf. Radicalism and extremism are on our doorstep, and we need to counteract this radicalism with radical new forms of creativity. And that's ultimately, I think, the journey that we're all on here too. So thank you.
Huge thanks to Noah Raford for catapulting, can't say many words today, into a future where jellyfish save us from extinction. I'm looking forward to that. We are at the end of this special edition of the Global Art Forum. Most of us have survived the heat, and we did this together. And I think that's also an important theme through this evening. Just a few things. It would be remiss of me not to thank His Excellency Suleiman Mazrui, who's the UAE Ambassador to the UK, and to Noura Al-Kabi, the Minister of Culture and Knowledge Development, for their support this evening. I want to thank all my amazing guests for their intelligence, for their insights, for their generosity, and for coming together in this way this evening. I want to thank you all for taking the time to join us this evening. And lastly, I hope to see you either in Singapore in September, if you happen to be passing through, 22nd, 23rd, or indeed in Dubai in March for the Global Art Forum at Art Dubai and all the other amazing activities that happen around that time. With that, goodbye, good evening, till the next time. Thank you very much.